Alright, Book Brats, it's time for me to do something I have not done yet, which is rate all of the ACOTAR books from worst to best. I understand that she's not done with the series yet, but she's writing at the speed of George R.R. Martin, which means she's never going to finish it, so we will rate what we got. Also know this, there will be spoilers in this video, so if you have yet to read the series and you're looking for a spoiler-free rating, you're not going to find it here. But if you have read the series and you just want to hear the opinions of a long-haired moron, you've come to the right place. Let's begin. So there are 5 books in this series, and let's start with the worst one of them all, which I think you will agree with. The worst book in the series is, without a doubt, A Court of Mist and Fury. I'm totally kidding, by the way. Don't throw your phone. We'll get to that book in a minute. The worst book in the series, without a doubt, is A Court of Frost and Starlight, or as I like to call it, A Court of Shopping and Snowball Fights. This book has been called the Christmas special, the Hallmark movie, if you will, of the series, and I have to agree. It's not a very good book because it's not really anything like the other books at all. When I read this at first, I did not enjoy it, but I will say this, I've been reading it on my Patreon, a chapter a day leading up to Christmas, link in description. And I kind of enjoy when you read it slowly. It's kind of cozy, especially during Christmas season. Now, if you read it in July, you might as well just burn it. But if you read it the right time of year, get yourself a nice cup of cocoa, some coffee or some tea, maybe a glass of whiskey or a line of Coke, whatever your thing is, it's a better time. Some notable moments from this book are Feyre discovering her irregular periods. She no longer has them once a month. She has them twice a year, which sounds great until you hear her describe it, which sounds like hell on earth. Another notable moment is Amren, who jumped out of the cauldron in the last book and now has a certain new set of something or others down there, doesn't know how to pee anymore. That's in there. I'll also say this about this book. It is not book 4. You can yell at me all you want, but it's not book 4. This is actually book 3.5, so it really doesn't fit in at the same capacity as the other books. This is a novella. Or novella, however you pronounce that. It's not a real book. Don't get mad at me. Get mad at Goodreads, because Goodreads says it's 3.5, not book 4. This is actually book 4, but we'll get to that in a minute. So I can't really judge it as a real book, but I will, and it's for this reason right here. If you look at the back, it costs $17 for this book. You know what book 1 costs? Book 1 costs $18. I'm sorry, $1 off might as well be nothing off. So if you're going to charge me full price for this book, I will give you a full price book rating. So, A Court of Snowmen, Snowballs, and Shopping. I give you the worst. Moving on to the next worst book in this series, and I don't think anybody's going to disagree with me on this. It just happens to be the truth, so if you disagree, you can be wrong. The next worst book in the series is A Court of Thorns and Roses. Now, you would think it being the first book, it would be the best book. That sounds plausible, but not in this series. Most people didn't like this book very much, but they kept reading it, which means that this is more of a cultural phenomenon than a good series. That probably just made some of you mad, but it's also true. But I did like this series, don't get me wrong. It just happens to be a cultural phenomenon. Anyway, this isn't a good book. It's really slow until the last 100 pages, which I thought were really good. Until you get to later in the series, then you can appreciate this book because you look back on it with nostalgic eyes and think to yourself, oh, my sweet summer child, I didn't know anything when I read this. What's funny is my mom just read this book and she thought it was such a good book. She said, I love this book so much. Speaking of my mom, she wants to talk to me about these books so far, so I can't wait until she gets to Silver Flames. Kill me. Her favorite character was Tamlin, which was odd because Tamlin is kind of the embodiment of a keyboard warrior. Like, he's really tough when it doesn't matter, and then when the rubber hits the road and he needs to be brave, he just kind of cowers down. That's Tamlin. So, at number 4, we have ACOTAR. So I'm caught up between 2 books on number 3. Not because they're better than the other, it's just they're different, and I have to pick one. So I gotta go with, screw it. Number 3, we're putting A Court of Wings and Ruin. Now this book is good. It really is. You have a lot of notable moments, like the time where all the gated communities of Prythian got together for the magical HOA meeting. You have Tamlin with his somewhat redemption arc where he saves Feyre, and then at the end he saves Rhysand by sprinkling his fairy dust and saying, be happy, girl. And on top of that, you have Rhys, who actually dies, which no one thought he was actually dead. She's not going to kill off the main boy toy. You have the King of Hybern being killed off by Elaine, which I actually forgot about until recently, which kind of moves her up from milquetoast to just as a character. There's a lot of good stuff in this book. It's very fast-paced. Now that I'm thinking about this, this should be number 2, shouldn't it? It's too late now. We're going to put this at number 3. So number 2 really could be number 3, and number 3 could be number 2. They may be interchangeable, but I have to say I prefer this book over Wings and Ruin because of the characters, not necessarily because of the story. And with that, number 2 is A Court of Silver Flames. I recently said online that this book is just packed with sex, and then somebody commented, it's only like 7% of the whole book. Grow up. Okay. But in hindsight, I think they're correct. But Nesta has a nasty mind. Oh, nasty Nesta. Gotta love it, though. There's a lot of notable moments in this book, too, like when Nesta finally went hands-on with Cassian, who became 10-second Tommy, or like when Nesta had the daydream of being smushed in between Azrael and Cassian, and not to take a picture. Good lord, girl. That image is just in my head most days when I think about this book, and I don't necessarily know what that means for me. But I really like Nesta as a character, mainly because of the development of her, the fact that she comes to terms with her own demons. There's a part where she's in the forest with Cassian going on a hike because Rhys just kicked her out of Valaris, and she realizes that she has all this past trauma and hurt, and she basically has this come to Jesus meeting, and I really could relate to that. It was nice. Which is another shocking moment for me, because I relate more to the women in these books rather than the men, because I'm not 7 feet tall with wings. I also like at the end where she has her girl power moment and kills the queen, wins the Hunger Games, and gathers all of the Deathly Hallows and becomes the Master of Death. I like her. She's a good character. I know she's not everybody's cup of tea, but she certainly is my shot of whiskey. And I also like Cassian in this book. I feel like Cassian is a better character than Rhys because he's not as morally gray as Rhysand. And I know what you're thinking. Oh, I want a morally gray man. Yeah, I get it. You want him to be able to burn down the world, but not hurt you. You want Voldemort with a soft spot. That's what you want. That's good in theory, but in practice, I feel like you would live a miserable existence. I think Cassian's a better character than Rhysand. Put your opinions in the comments. So ranking number 2 is going to have to be A Court of Silver Flames, which leaves the best book in the series, in my opinion, and oddly enough, most people's opinion. Number 1, A Court of Mist and Fury. This is the best book in the series, mainly because you go from this and you think the story is going one way, although at the end it's kind of up in the air, like, oh, what's going to happen? But you go from one-sided story of, yeah, this is predictable, sure, into, oh, this is fun. You also get to go from the Spring Court to the Night Court, and when you pin these up against one another, there is no comparison. There's no competition. Night Court all day. I love the Night Court in this book. It just seems like a place I would want to live in until you realize it's not safe at all, and I should not be anywhere near this place. But in theory, it sounds like a fun place. And you get to meet the Bat Boys, you get to meet Amryn, you get to meet Morgan, all of the people involved in the rest of the stories. But more importantly, I love the ending to this book. If this book ended and that was the last book in the series, that would be enough, because she basically leaves from the Night Court or wherever she's at and goes back to the Spring Court pretending to be on Tamlin's side, and you could just let your mind run wild after this book. I want to read you the last sentence of this book. It's so good. And so Tamlin unwittingly led the High Lady of the Night Court into the heart of his territory. Oh! Come on! Such a good ending. And this was the best Feyre ever is at the end of this book. Because she's a spy, she's going in as a boss queen, and you're like, come freaking slay, come on. And then the next book happens, and she just deflates and is not as cool anymore. But the way this book ended, I like it. I also liked how she was caught in that custody battle between Tamlin and Rhysand and was shipped off to him once a month like he's a deadbeat father or something. And I forgot about this part until somebody reminded me. Whenever she goes to the Night Court, Rhysand is trying to teach her how to read and write, and he makes her write sentences that say, Rhysand is so good looking, Rhysand is so handsome. And you have to remember that he's 500 and she's 18, which is creepy. He's basically grooming her, but say it with me. If he's Fey, it's okay. Another notable moment is when Nesta and Elaine get thrown into the cauldron against their will while Feyre has diarrhea in the corner somewhere, and they pop out with immortality and magic and also hatred for the person that threw them in there, when in reality I would be writing him a thank you letter. The point is, this is the best book in the series. I really enjoyed this book, and one day I'll read it again. That about wraps up this video. What did you think of my ranking of these 5 different books? Do you have a different opinion? If so, let me know in the comments, and I will see you in the next video.